Harlow Falls, Tennessee. Monday, 8:39 a.m. The saw had just finished its cut when the phone buzzed. Cole Merritt answered, sawdust still on his hands. The school secretary's voice came through flat and measured the kind of calm that belongs to someone who has already made up their mind before dialing. Your daughter is being held in the office. There's a very serious matter. He didn't change clothes, didn't wash his hands. He locked the job site and drove straight there. On the principal's desk, a single sheet of paper waited like a verdict already written. 98 out of 100, the highest score in the county. Stamped across the top in hard, unforgiving ink, referred for academic dishonesty review. Emma hadn't cheated. Cole knew that the way he knew the grain of wood beneath his hands. What he didn't know yet was what proving it would cost him. Cole Merritt had spent the last 10 years learning how to make things with his hands instead of his mind. It wasn't that he'd forgotten the other life. The chalk dust, the classrooms, the particular quiet of a room full of students working through a problem they hadn't solved yet. He remembered all of it. He just couldn't live inside it anymore. Not after Sarah. After she was gone, teaching felt like standing in a house where every room reminded him of someone who no longer walked through it. So he left. He picked up tools instead of textbooks, took contracts instead of semesters, and built things that didn't require him to feel anything except the resistance of wood beneath a blade. That worked mostly. For 10 years it worked. What he hadn't accounted for was Emma. She was 14 now, quiet in the way that some children are quiet, not from shyness, but from depth. She had few friends and seemed unbothered by that fact, preferring the company of numbers to most people she knew. Cole had noticed over the years that she'd pulled nearly every old textbook off his shelf, the ones from his graduate years, the advanced proof theory volumes he hadn't opened since before Sarah got sick. Emma never asked permission. She'd just take them to her room and return them weeks later, the spine slightly more worn than before. He never asked what she was doing with them. He understood in the wordless way that fathers sometimes do that she was building something private and necessary. Her teachers had never quite known what to make of her. Emma didn't raise her hand in class. She didn't explain her work in the expected way. She arrived at correct answers through paths that looked unfamiliar on paper, and more than once had been marked wrong for a right answer because the method didn't match the rubric. Cole knew about those instances. Emma had mentioned them once offhandedly, the way she mentioned most things that bothered her, as if stating a fact rather than registering a complaint. So when the county mathematics competition came around, Cole had encouraged her to enter without expecting much from the outcome. Emma had shrugged and signed the registration form. Neither of them made a thing of it. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon. 98 out of 100. Highest score in the county. Higher than Tyler Voss. Cole hadn't known the name at first. Emma had mentioned it quietly over dinner, the way she mentioned everything without ceremony, without visible pride. It was Cole who later pieced together who Tyler Voss was, 16 years old, 2 years Emma's senior son of Richard Voss, the man whose name appeared on the bronze donor plaque near the school's front entrance. Richard Voss had built his reputation in Harlow Falls, the way men like him always did through money, deployed at the right moments, in the right rooms. He had won the loyalty of the school board with a $500,000 pledge toward the new library wing, a construction project, still months from breaking ground. His son Tyler had won the county math competition 3 consecutive years. It had become in that quiet way of small-town traditions expected. Emma had not been expected. 48 hours after the results were published, Richard Voss filed a formal complaint with the school administration. His argument was precise and deliberately framed Emma's methods, as shown in her submitted work, bore no resemblance to anything taught in the 9th grade curriculum. The implication never stated outright, but present in every line, was that an answer this correct, arrived at through an approach this unusual, could only have come from an outside source. The complaint landed on the desk of Dr. Karen Shields. Karen was 36, relatively new to Harlow Falls High, having transferred from a larger district 2 years prior, with intentions that were genuine and clearly stated she wanted to modernize a school that had been running on inertia for a decade. She had the credentials, the energy, and the conviction. What she was still learning, and what Harlow Falls had not yet finished teaching her, was how power moved in a small town. It moved quietly. It moved through handshakes and phone calls and the particular weight of a name on a donor plaque. She called Cole that Monday morning. He was already at the job site by the time the call connected. Cole locked the site and drove straight to the school. Karen's office was neat in the way that new authority often is everything in its place, nothing yet worn enough to show a history. She stood when he entered, which he noted without reading anything into it. Emma was not in the room. A door to the left was closed. Cole sat across from Karen and waited. Karen laid it out in the careful language of administrators. There was no direct evidence of academic dishonesty. The complaint had not come with proof. However, the complaint had come from here. She chose her words, a stakeholder of significant influence, and the school was obligated under its academic integrity policy to open a formal review. During the 3-week investigation period, Emma would be suspended from all academic competitions and extracurricular activities. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When Karen finished, the room held the particular silence of a conversation waiting to turn. Cole looked at the file on her desk, Emma's name on the tab, the printed complaint visible beneath it, and then looked back at Karen. "What's the specific evidence?" he said. Karen's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "The complaint identifies the methodology as inconsistent with, 'That's not evidence,'" Cole said. "That's an observation." "What is the specific evidence that my daughter cheated?" Karen said nothing. Cole nodded slowly, the way a man nods when a thing he suspected has been confirmed. He had come into that office prepared to be shown something: a copied answer, a matched source, a timestamp, anything with weight. Instead, he'd been shown a complaint from a man with $500,000 in leverage and a son who'd lost for the first time in 3 years. He understood the position Karen was in. He didn't blame her for it. But understanding a thing and accepting it were different actions, and Cole had not driven across town to accept it. "What are my options?" he asked. Karen explained that he could engage legal representation, submit a written response to the review committee, or request an independent academic panel, though the latter would require approval from the district superintendent, whose office had already been in contact with the school regarding the complaint. Cole absorbed that last detail quietly. The superintendent's office. Already. He asked to see Emma. The door to the left opened into a small waiting area. Emma was sitting in one of the chairs with her backpack on her lap, both arms folded across it like she was holding it in place. She looked up when Cole walked in. She didn't say anything. Neither did he for a moment. He just looked at her. This 14-year-old girl who solved problems in her sleep and had never once in her entire life needed to take a shortcut, because shortcuts were for people who couldn't find their own way through. "You didn't cheat," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Emma said. "Okay." He put a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Then we're going to be fine." He didn't know yet if that was true, but he said it the way he said everything that mattered, like a measurement he intended to make accurate by the time it counted. Back in the hallway, Cole stood outside the administration wing long enough to make one decision. He could trust the process. He could submit a written response, wait 3 weeks, and hope that a review committee in a district where the superintendent's office was already fielding calls from Richard Voss would arrive at the right conclusion. That was one path. It was the path that required him to believe the system would correct itself when given the facts. The other path required him to be the one who delivered the facts directly, specifically in a form no one could dismiss. Cole had spent 10 years keeping a version of himself locked in a storage unit somewhere in the back of his memory. The man who had stood before rooms full of students and worked through mathematical proofs until the logic was airtight. The man who had spent 3 years as a national-level adjudicator for academic decathlon, reviewing student work, with the precision of someone who knew the difference between a wrong answer and a right answer that looked unfamiliar. He had put that man away because living as him had become too painful after Sarah died. But that man had not forgotten anything. Cole walked to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Through the windshield, the school building looked the same as it always did, red brick American flag above the entrance, the donor plaque catching the morning light near the front doors. He started the engine. He had 2 hands, 1 daughter, and enough of his former self left to know exactly what Emma's methods meant, and exactly why they weren't plagiarism. That would have to be enough. Martin Webb had taught mathematics at Harlow Falls High for 31 years. He knew every crack in the ceiling of room 14, every student who had ever surprised him, and exactly how much longer he needed to last before his pension vested in full. 2 years. 23 months if you wanted the number he kept in the back of his mind, the way other men kept lucky coins. Cole found him after school in the hallway outside the math wing, stacking papers into a canvas bag with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done the same thing at the same hour for 3 decades. Cole hadn't called ahead. He had learned in the days since the meeting with Karen that calling ahead gave people time to prepare their refusals. Martin looked up when he heard footsteps, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise exactly, but recognition. As if he'd been expecting this conversation to find him eventually. Cole explained what he needed, not a formal statement, not a signature on anything, just confirmation from someone qualified to give it that Emma's methodology was mathematically legitimate. He needed to know he wasn't wrong about his own daughter's work before he committed to a fight he couldn't take back. Martin listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, the older man looked down the empty hallway in both directions, an instinct, not a performance, and then spoke in a low, even voice. "The method your daughter used," Martin said, "comes out of advanced proof theory. It's not in any 9th grade textbook. It's barely in most undergraduate curricula." He picked up his canvas bag. "But it's completely correct. More than that, it's elegant. The kind of solution you arrive at when you understand the underlying structure well enough to work from first principles instead of learned procedure." Cole felt something settle in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding until it released. "And there's no material she could have copied it from," Martin continued. "Not at her level. Not available to a 14-year-old in this school district. What the committee flagged as suspicious is actually the opposite of what they think it is." He looked at Cole directly. "It's proof she understood the problem better than anyone else in that room." "I need you to say that," Cole said, "officially, to the review committee." Martin set his bag down on the floor. He looked at Cole the way a man looks at someone he respects and is about to disappoint. "I have 23 months left," he said quietly. "If I stand up in front of that committee and contradict Richard Voss's formal complaint, I am not retiring with full benefits. That's not paranoia. That's how this works here. You know that." Cole knew that. "You're the only person in this building with the background to fight this properly," Martin said. "Not me. You." He held Cole's gaze. "I'm sorry. I genuinely am." Cole picked up nothing on his way out. He thanked Martin because the man had at least confirmed what he needed to confirm, and walked back through the empty hallway toward the parking lot. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. The building smelled like floor wax and old paper, the way schools always smelled, the way they had smelled when he used to belong in them. He drove home with Emma's competition paper on the passenger seat, retrieved from the administration office that afternoon, as part of the formal review documentation he'd requested. 3 pages. He read them again at the kitchen table after Emma went to bed, and then he began to write. He returned to Karen's office 2 days later without an appointment. The receptionist started to tell him that Dr. Shields was unavailable. Cole said he would wait. He sat in the chair nearest the inner office door and did not take out his phone. He simply waited with the stillness of someone who had learned that patience applied correctly was its own form of pressure. Karen appeared 20 minutes later, caught somewhere between irritation and reluctant curiosity. She held the door open. He went in. Cole set 3 pages of handwritten analysis on her desk. He didn't explain what they were. He sat across from her and waited while she read. The pages reconstructed Emma's entire solution from memory, each step annotated with the formal name of the mathematical principle it drew from the theoretical framework it belonged to, and a citation trail pointing back to graduate-level academic sources. Cole had written it the night before in 2 hours, the way you write something you've known for a long time and are only now putting into words. Karen read without speaking. She turned the 2nd page, then the 3rd. When she reached the end, she set the papers down and looked at them for a moment before looking up. "Where did you study mathematics, Mr. Merritt?" "I have a background in math education," Cole said. "That's all." Karen looked at the pages again. Cole could see her recalibrating something, adjusting a picture of him that had been assembled from incomplete information. He didn't help her do it. He let her arrive at whatever conclusion the evidence supported. "I'll review this," she said finally. "I know you will," Cole said. He left the pages on her desk and walked out. That night, Karen stayed in her office long after the building emptied. She pulled Emma's full academic record, every grade, every teacher notation, every marked assignment from 6th grade through the present. What she found, spread across 3 years of documentation, was a pattern so consistent it was almost methodical. Emma had been marked wrong repeatedly on problems she had solved correctly, not because her answers were incorrect, but because her methods didn't match the expected procedure. The same note appeared in different handwriting across different years. Non-standard approach, show work, per rubric method, unclear. No one had ever looked at those notations together. No one had ever asked what it meant that a student arrived at correct answers through paths her teachers didn't recognize. Taken individually, each instance looked like a compliance issue. Taken together, they looked like something else entirely, a mind that had been working at a different level for years, undetected, because the system wasn't designed to detect it. Karen printed the records and set them in a separate folder. Then she opened her browser and began researching Tyler Voss's preparation for the county competition. It wasn't something she would have thought to do before tonight. But Cole's 3 pages had shifted, something in her. Thinking had reminded her that the absence of explanation is not the same thing as the presence of guilt. And once that distinction was clear, she found herself asking different questions. The tutor's name appeared in a local business profile, a private mathematics instructor, hired by the Voss family 6 months before the competition. Karen clicked through to the tutor's professional biography. Listed among his professional affiliations was a consulting relationship with the county academic competition's organizing committee. The listing had been updated recently. The affiliation was gone from the current version, but the cached page from 8 months prior still existed in a search archive, and it was unambiguous. Karen took a pen and underlined the line twice. She sat with that piece of paper in the quiet of her empty office for a long time. She had come to Harlow Falls with intentions she still believed in. She had also learned in 2 years that good intentions unprotected by good judgment accomplished very little. What she was holding now was not proof of anything, not yet, not in any formal sense. But it was the kind of detail that changed the shape of a story. She put it in the folder with Emma's academic records and locked the drawer. 3 days later, Richard Voss escalated. He filed a petition directly with the State Department of Education, requesting the nullification of the entire county competition results on the grounds of procedural oversight failures in exam administration. The legal framing was careful and effective. It made no specific accusation against Emma. It didn't need to. If the petition succeeded, The results would simply cease to exist. Emma's score would be erased, not because she was found guilty, but because the process itself would be declared invalid. The state qualifying slot she had earned would be voided along with everything else. Karen received a call from the district superintendent that same afternoon. The superintendent's voice was measured and collegial, which was its own kind of message. He spoke about the importance of community partnerships, about the delicate position the district was in, about the need to find a resolution that satisfied multiple stakeholders. Karen listened, carefully translating as she went. What the superintendent was saying underneath the administrative language was that Richard Voss had made a phone call above Karen's pay grade, and the district would prefer a quiet resolution to a correct one. She thanked the superintendent for his guidance and ended the call. Then she sat at her desk and thought about the folder in her locked drawer and about a 3-page handwritten analysis that had taken her longer to read than it should have because she'd had to look up 2 of the theoretical references to confirm they were real. They were. Emma stopped eating in the cafeteria sometime during the 2nd week. Cole noticed because he asked her about her day, and she described lunch in terms that didn't include anyone else, didn't include a location, a table, a sound. He asked once carefully, and she told him she'd been eating in the library. Her voice carried no particular inflection when she said it. That was how Cole knew it was bad. Emma only went flat like that when she was managing something she didn't want him to worry about. He heard it in the hallways, too. Secondhand a parent at the hardware store who mentioned the competition, a neighbor who looked at him a beat too long before saying good morning. In a town the size of Harlow Falls, the space between a formal complaint and a public verdict was very short. Emma had been tried in the hallways of her school before any committee had reached a conclusion. One night past 11, Cole was sitting in the dark of the living room. He hadn't turned on a light. He wasn't reading or watching anything. He was simply sitting with the weight of everything he couldn't control, which was most of it. From behind Emma's closed door came a sound, small, repetitive, steady. The soft tap of calculator keys. Not frantic, not desperate, just continuous the way water runs. She was working through problems in the dark of her own room, not because anyone had assigned them, not because she was preparing for anything. She was doing it because it was the one thing that still belonged entirely to her. The one space where no complaint, no donor pledge, and no review committee had any jurisdiction. Cole sat in the hallway, with his back against the wall outside her door, and listened to the sound of his daughter refusing to stop. His eyes burned. He didn't move. He knew sitting there that he was close to the edge of what he could accomplish with analysis and documentation alone. He had the mathematics. He had the pattern in the records. He had the detail Karen had found, which she hadn't shown him yet, but which he suspected existed because the structure of Richard Voss's escalation was too precise to be purely reactive. Someone on the other side had something to protect. What he needed now was a witness, someone with no stake in the outcome, no relationship to any party, no reason to say anything except what they had seen with their own eyes. He needed someone who had been in that exam room, and he knew exactly who to ask first. Cole went back to Martin one final time not to ask him to testify and not to revisit the argument they'd already had. He went with a single question who had been in that room on the day of the exam. Martin wrote a name on the back of a receipt he pulled from his coat pocket and handed it across without ceremony. Then he picked up his canvas bag and walked away, and Cole let him go. The name was Dorothy Hale. She lived 25 minutes outside of Harlow Falls, in a small yellow house set back from the road, with a birdbath in the front yard and a porch that looked like it had been repainted every few years, with careful attention. Cole drove out on a Wednesday afternoon unannounced, because he'd learned by now that phone calls gave people room to construct their hesitation in advance. Dorothy answered the door in a cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and looked at Cole with the alert, unhurried expression of someone who had spent 21 years watching rooms full of young people under pressure and had gotten very good at reading a room. He explained who he was. He explained Emma. He explained the complaint, the review, the petition to the state, and the particular shape of silence that had settled over his daughter in the past 2 weeks. Dorothy listened to all of it standing in her doorway, and when he finished, she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. "I've been wondering why no one called me." She had kept journals a habit formed in her first year of proctoring and never abandoned. Not formal reports, just personal records, observations, small notes about unusual moments, things that caught her attention during examinations she administered over the years. She retrieved the relevant volume from a shelf in her study, without having to search for it. The entry for Emma's exam was dated and detailed. Dorothy had noted a student at seat 7 who worked without scratch paper from the first minute to the last solving, entirely in her head, committing answers to the page in small, precise handwriting, with almost no visible intermediate steps. Dorothy had watched because she was curious. In 21 years of proctoring, she had seen that particular quality of concentration only once before, in a student who later earned a full mathematics scholarship to a university out of state. "I wrote it down because I thought someone might want to know eventually," Dorothy said, setting the journal on the table between them. "I assumed someone would ask." Cole looked at the entry. The handwriting was clear, the date unambiguous, the observation specific enough to be testimony and personal enough to be credible. "Would you be willing to sign a notarized statement?" he asked. Dorothy had already reached for a pen. Karen proposed the independent academic review panel on a Thursday morning in a memo addressed to the district superintendent and copied to the school board. She did not ask permission. She cited the academic integrity policy, the school's obligation to due process, and the 3-page handwritten analysis that had been submitted as part of the formal review record. She did not mention the cached web page in her locked drawer. She did not need to. She had included it as an attachment to a separate letter addressed to the panel chair marked for review prior to the hearing. The superintendent called her within the hour. The conversation was brief and tense and concluded with the superintendent informing her that this decision would be noted in her file. Karen thanked him and began preparing the hearing room. Richard Voss arrived with a lawyer. The lawyer had a briefcase and the practiced ease of someone accustomed to winning arguments through volume rather than weight. He sat up at one end of the long table in the hearing room with the quiet confidence of a man who believed the outcome had already been arranged. Cole arrived with 3 documents in a manila folder. The independent academic review panel consisted of 5 members, 2 from the district's academic affairs office, 1 retired school administrator brought in from a neighboring county, 1 curriculum specialist, and Dr. Angela Torres, whose professional background was in applied mathematics at the university level. Karen had selected the panel herself. She had been deliberate about Dr. Torres, also present seated against the far wall behind a partial partition of glass and painted wood that separated the main room from an observation area, was Tyler Voss. 16 years old, the boy who had held the county title 3 consecutive years before Emma's score made that history. He sat very still. Cole noticed him when he came in and did not look at him again. Richard Voss's lawyer spoke first, and he spoke at length. His argument was constructed entirely around the absence of a conventional explanation for Emma's methodology. The work didn't look like 9th grade work. The approach didn't appear in any curriculum document. The student had offered no explanation during the exam. Each of these facts was real. The lawyer arranged them in a sequence designed to make an unusual answer look like a suspicious one, and he did it professionally. When the lawyer finished, the panel chair looked at Cole. Cole stood. He didn't reach for the microphone at the table. He set his manila folder down, opened it, and placed the 3 documents in front of him without fanfare. "The method my daughter used doesn't appear in any 9th grade textbook," he said. "That's accurate. It also doesn't appear in any material a student could access to copy from. It comes from a branch of advanced proof theory that most undergraduate mathematics students haven't encountered. What the complaint identifies as a reason for suspicion is actually evidence of the opposite. It's what a correct solution looks like when the person solving it understands the underlying structure well enough to derive the approach independently, rather than applying a memorized procedure. He slid the first document forward, the 3-page handwritten analysis, already part of the formal record. This is a full reconstruction of my daughter's solution, annotated with the formal theoretical framework it draws from. The citations are verifiable. The mathematics is sound. I'm prepared to walk through any portion of it the panel wishes to examine. He placed the second document on the table, Dorothy Hale's notarized statement. This is a signed declaration from the examination proctor for the county competition. Dorothy Hale administered that exam. She observed my daughter throughout the testing period and documented her observations the same day. Her statement describes specifically the manner in which Emma worked without scratch paper entirely in her head from the first minute. That is not the working pattern of someone transcribing answers from an outside source. That is the working pattern of someone who already knows how to find the answer. Then he placed the third document down. And this is a letter of confirmation from the National Academic Decathlon Committee, verifying that I served 3 consecutive years as a national-level mathematics adjudicator from 2008 through 2010. I have reviewed student mathematical work at the highest level of secondary competition in this country. I know the difference between a wrong answer, a right answer arrived at through standard procedure, and a right answer arrived at through independent reasoning. My daughter's work is the third kind. I have spent the past 3 weeks verifying that conclusion from every angle I know how to apply. He closed the folder. The complaint against Emma is based on the assumption that an unusual method must have an external source. That assumption is wrong. The panel has the documentation in front of them. I have nothing else to add. He sat down. Dr. Angela Torres had been writing steadily throughout. She looked up now and asked 2 questions, precise, technical, directed at the theoretical framework Cole had cited in the handwritten analysis. Cole answered both without hesitation. Doctor, Torres wrote something and underlined it. A second panel member, the retired administrator, looked down at the documents and then up at Richard Voss's lawyer with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that wasn't coming out the way they'd expected. Does the panel have documentation? The administrator asked, addressing the room generally, regarding the preparation activities of other competition participants in the months prior to the examination. The lawyer's response was immediate and smooth, an objection to relevance, a redirect toward procedural concerns. But the question had been asked, and it was in the air. Richard Voss at the far end of the table had gone very still. The panel chair called a recess of 40 minutes. Cole sat in the hallway on a bench outside the hearing room. He set his elbows on his knees and put his face in his hands and stayed that way. He had done everything he knew how to do. The mathematics was correct. The witness was credible. The documentation was solid. There was nothing left to deliver. Either the panel would see what was in front of them, or they would find a reason not to, and Cole had no more moves to make in either direction. He had spent a long time building things with his hands, precisely because his hands could always find the next step. This was the one kind of work where at some point you simply ran out of steps. The door to the hearing room opened. Karen walked out and sat down on the bench beside him. She didn't preamble it. They're reinstating Emma's score. Full reinstatement. The complaint has been dismissed. She keeps her state qualifying slot. Cole lifted his head. His eyes were red at the edges. He didn't speak immediately. He looked down the length of the hallway at the lockers, the scuffed floor, the water fountain mounted crookedly on the far wall, and he stayed there for a moment, adjusting to the absence of the thing he'd been bracing against. The tutor, he said, finally. Entered into the official record, Karen said. No formal investigation announced, but it's there in writing in the archived documentation of this hearing. She looked at her hands. That doesn't go away. Cole nodded. Behind the partition in the hearing room, Tyler Voss had listened to every word of the proceeding. He had heard his father's lawyer speak, and he had heard Cole speak, and he had watched a panel of 5 adults read 3 documents and reach a conclusion in 40 minutes. He was 16 years old, and he had just understood something about the structure of the world he lived in, not as an abstraction, but as a specific and permanent fact. No one in that room would say it to him directly. No one needed to. Some things settle into a person not as punishment, but as knowledge, and knowledge of that particular kind is not something you put down. 3 weeks after the hearing, Emma placed 5th out of 241 competitors at the state mathematics competition. On the drive home, the Tennessee sky stretched wide and orange ahead of them. Emma watched the fields pass outside the window for a long time before she spoke. "I don't really care about the ranking anymore," she said. "I just needed to show it wasn't a fluke." "It wasn't," Cole said. "I know." She pulled her knees up toward the dashboard. "I just needed other people to know too." They drove the rest of the way in the kind of quiet that doesn't require filling. 6 weeks after the hearing, Cole finished the gymnasium floor, the contract he had signed before any of this began, because Cole Merritt finished what he started. He came in on a Friday afternoon to complete the final section, working alone, in the low light of late day, the smell of fresh-cut pine and polyurethane filling the empty room. He heard footsteps at the door and looked up to find Karen standing at the edge of the floor he'd just laid, careful not to step onto the unfinished surface. She looked around the room with an expression that wasn't quite what he'd expected. "Have you ever thought about going back to teaching?" she asked. Cole set down his tool and looked at the floor at the clean lines, the grain running true, the work that would hold weight for years without anyone thinking about who had put it there. He thought about a classroom. He thought about the specific quality of silence that fell over a room when a student stopped being confused and started being certain. He had tried for a long time not to think about that. "Some things you can't go back to," he said. Karen looked at him steadily. "And some things you've been ready for longer than you've admitted." He didn't answer. He didn't look away either. The gymnasium door swung open, and Emma came in from the cold, cheeks flushed, backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked at Cole, then at Karen, then back at Cole with the particular attention of a 14-year-old who had spent her whole life learning to read the adults around her. Karen turned to her. "You handled everything that happened with a great deal of dignity. I want you to know that." Emma met her eyes without looking away, without the small, reflexive deflection she used to perform whenever someone said something kind to her. "Thank you for believing me, when it wasn't the easy thing to do." The 3 of them stood in the gymnasium as the afternoon light came through the high windows and laid long rectangles of gold across the floor Cole had just finished. No one announced that anything was ending or beginning. The room simply held them the smell of new wood, the stillness after effort, the particular quality of a space built to last. Some things don't declare themselves. They just begin